Science fiction and future-minded thinkers have always thought about a utopian future where artificial intelligence, highly advanced computers, and technological advancements make for a better society than we see today. However, the dystopian interpretations are far more likely. Often these criticize the roles of corporations, governments, and the disruption to the human relationship with both each other and the world around us. Few seem to contend with the fact that women play such a small role in many of these fields, and how that can affect these advancements. For example, AI can make decisions that affect whether a person is admitted into a school, authorized for a bank loan, or accepted as a rental applicant. It is relatively common knowledge that AI systems can exhibit biases that stem from their programming and data sources. For example, machine learning software could be trained on a dataset that underrepresents a particular gender or ethnic group. This issue has been ongoing for years, as the New York Times reports. About 6 years ago, an AI in a Google online photo service organized photos of Black people into a folder called Gorillas. 4 years ago, a researcher at a New York startup noticed that the AI system she was working on was egregiously biased against Black people. Not long after, a Black researcher in Boston discovered that an AI system couldn't identify her face, until she put on a white mask. Because those who pick the data AI is trained on tends to be white men, the data used for training is not representative of a fully diverse world, both regarding race and gender. This is typically attributed to women just not being cut out for working in STEM. The argument goes that men are more left-brained, better at math and science, or that women simply aren't interested. After all, despite making up nearly half of the U.S. workforce, women are still vastly underrepresented in the science, technology, engineering, and math workforce. Women have made gains from 8% of STEM workers in 1970 to 27% in 2019, but men still dominate the field. Men make up 52% of all U.S. workers, but 73% of all STEM workers. The role of stereotype threat, wherein individuals fear that they may confirm negative stereotypes about their social group, plays a large role in the demographics of these fields. In other words, when you are made aware of a stereotype placed upon you, you may perform worse than you would if you were not made aware of the stereotype.
This is the exact phenomenon I studied for my PhD. It's called stereotype threat, and often people haven't even heard that phrase, or if they have heard it, they have a misconception of what it is. Stereotype threat is a phenomenon whereby negative stereotypes about aspects of our identity can affect our performance. For example, there is a negative stereotype about women in math, right? Because girls can't do math. There's also a positive stereotype about Asian people, that Asian people are all really good at math. So one group of researchers took Asian women and randomized them into two groups. One group was asked their race before they took a math test, and the other group was asked their gender before they took a math test. And what they found was that those who were asked their gender performed worse than those who were asked their race. People have repeated these experiments with, for example, white men and athletic skills, and Black and Hispanic students, and tests of intellectual ability, and found similar findings in many, many, many studies. Importantly, this really only happens if we are invested in this particular task or performance. So if you're a woman about to take a math test, but you don't care about math or you don't like math, it doesn't matter if they ask you your gender before your test. It's probably not going to change your performance. So perversely, it's those of us who care the most who are most likely to be affected by this phenomenon. When I had started my PhD, I was planning to study medical education, like how we design curricula, how we assess people's skills. I wasn't planning to study gender stereotypes. But when I learned about stereotype threat, it just blew me away, because it put into question everything that I had been taught before about these so-called objective tests of intelligence or skill, like the SAT, the ACT, etc. If something as simple as asking your race or your gender before a test can negatively impact your performance, what is that test really telling us? Honestly, it's not as much as we used to think that it did. And when we're talking about examinations, this is a relatively easy thing to address because we can just ask those demographic questions at the end rather than at the beginning of the test. But in the real world, which is what I studied for my dissertation, when people are showing up to work in spaces where there are negative stereotypes about their ability based on their identity, it's a very different solution.
For example, being the only Black person in a room might make you hyper-aware of your race and cause you anxiety that creates a decreased performance on an exam. This was proven in Steele and Aronson's original study, which looked at Black and white students' performance on an academic test, specifically a 30-minute test made up of items from the verbal section of the graduate record examination. Steele and Aronson chose this procedure in response to the racial stereotype that Black students are less intelligent or less capable than white students. Given the stereotype threat against Black students' academic abilities, the researchers hypothesized that when Black students were primed with the belief that the test was diagnostic of intellectual ability, they would perform worse than white students. Confirming their suspicions, Steele and Aronson's findings showed that Black participants underperformed white participants when the test was labeled diagnostic of intellectual ability, but they performed equally well when the test was labeled non-diagnostic. By labeling the test as diagnostic of intelligence in the stereotype threat condition, the experiment effectively made Black students more vulnerable to judgment about their race's academic ability. Similarly, when women perform math, unlike men, they risk being judged by the negative stereotype that women have weaker math ability. In a 1999 study by Spencer et al., the anxiety caused by stereotype threat was hypothesized to affect women's math performance. This was tested through 2 studies. The first study found that women underperform on difficult but not easy math tests was observed through a highly selected sample of men and women, while a second study demonstrated that this difference in performance could be eliminated when we lowered stereotype threat by describing the test as not producing gender differences. However, when the test was described as producing gender differences and stereotype threat was high, women performed substantially worse than equally qualified men did. In conjunction with less support to remain in STEM after childhood, that the STEM field remains male-dominated also creates a hostile environment where sexual harassment and abuse flourishes.
Check out this picture of the latest group of interns that matched into the Stanford surgery department. I see a group of outstanding medical students that successfully matched into an elite surgery program. Twitter says no. Instead of celebrating the success of these future surgeons, Twitter is now bashing them so much so that Stanford had to limit their comments. Why are we like this? Congrats to the future residents for getting a spot based on diversity quotas instead of merit. You must be so proud. These people literally don't understand how the match process works. Do you think Stanford intentionally chose that every single one of their match candidates except for one was female? No! Let's simplify the match process. We have the schools that list all of their candidates that they would like to see match into their program, and we have a list of candidates that match all of their schools that they would like to match into. It goes into this convoluted algorithm and bam, the match. So House, this is not pretty blatant prejudice against men. It's not absurd sexism. It's a group of talented future surgeons. Now go kick some ass, ladies.
A 2023 study from Georgia State studied this, as while it has been argued that increasing the number of women in the science, technology, engineering, and math fields could mitigate violence against women by advancing gender equality, some research points to a backlash effect wherein gains in gender equality are associated with heightened sexual violence against women. The study found that women majoring in STEM disciplines that are gender balanced reported more SV victimization in the form of sexual coercion, attempted rape, and rape, compared to their peers in both gender balanced and male-dominated non-STEM and male-dominated STEM majors. These associations held even after controlling for age, race/ethnicity, victimization prior to college, sexual orientation, college binge drinking, and hard drug use during college. Many critics like to argue against the need for targeted programs and opportunities for women to enter the field by saying that women just can't handle it, that men are better at the field, or otherwise downplay the impact of harassment on one's decision to enter a field of employment, hobby, or academia. These claims often ignore that women perform just fine, if not better, in many fields than men. For example, although men famously make up 91% of the software development industry, researchers in a gender-blind study discovered that code written by women was approved at a higher rate than software code written by men. Women were also big players at the beginning of the field, as if we trace the origins of computer programming, 75% of codebreakers at Bletchley Park were women, and engineering at NASA was predominantly performed by women. In fact, Ada Lovelace, an English mathematician, is widely known as the world's first computer programmer. Women have always been involved in science, math, and technology, though their contributions were often overwritten, stolen, or not given the same amount of respect as their male peers. From Katherine Johnson, who, along with her colleagues, Dorothy Vaughan and Mary Jackson, did the calculations that guided NASA's 1962 Friendship 7 mission, to Joan Clark, who was born in 1917 and gained a first in mathematics from Cambridge, but was denied a full degree as Cambridge did not award them to women at the time, and was the only woman to work in the nerve center of the quest to track German Enigma ciphers. There is a long history of women making huge contributions to various STEM fields, from mathematics to coding to medicine and research.
So someone commented on one of my videos recently about how all of these companies and institutions are literally begging for women to be in STEM, like doing everything they possibly can to incentivize women to pursue STEM fields. So the only reason why women don't is because we simply don't want to. Like, we're not interested in pursuing STEM. And I think something that we don't talk about enough is the culture of what it's like to be in the STEM field. Men love to treat you like you're stupid, like you're a prop. Men will make fun of you from anything to what you're wearing to like having your period. I literally had a professor making fun of me because I was on my period. And then a crazy statistic that I learned from doing my thesis at engineering school is from this landmark report in 2018 that over 50% of women in STEM academics have experienced sexual harassment. Over 50%. The likeliness that I could pursue this field and experience sexual harassment is a coin toss. Now, who would want that?
I find the constant desire to undermine the impact of sexual harassment, sexism, and misogyny within the industry to be telling. Typically, this pushback comes from men who either don't recognize the impact of these forces on performance and mental and physical health, or from those who simply choose to believe, despite the evidence, that sexism does not greatly impact how women perform. They prefer to believe that these imbalances are indicative of a natural mental deficiency in women, a widely held belief that even women internalize, thus leading to performances that seem to prove these beliefs true. However, even women may resist acknowledging the impact of these forces, as doing so proves the veracity of one of Andrea Dworkin's quotes. Many women, I think, resist feminism because it is an agony to be fully conscious of the brutal misogyny which permeates culture, society, and all personal relationships. While there has been an increase of women in STEM, the pandemic and later tech bubble burst has seen women being disproportionately affected by job cuts, making up 69.2% of all tech layoffs according to the Women Tech Network, and that's on top of the industry's ongoing gender imbalance. Women hold just 26% of jobs across all STEM occupations, and even less, 24%, in computer fields, according to the latest available data from the U.S. Department of Labor. It is for these reasons that the Grace Hopper celebration is so needed and illustrates just why allowing anyone to identify into womanhood, or some vague identity which claims to face the same issues, is so harmful to allowing equality in the STEM fields.
Ladies, we did it. We made the news. For those of you who don't know, 2 days ago I shared a video about how this year's Grace Hopper annual conference, which has been historically a women's only event, was inflated by an influx of men who are harassing, following, stalking, pushing women around, just all types of wild quote-unquote zoo behavior, and this got picked up by a major news outlet. Here's a quick recap of the article, and keep in mind the author did do their own research to verify claims. The event was the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing, which took place in Orlando this year in September 26th to 29th. Attendees said that women were being shoved by men, and men cut lines to submit their resumes ahead to tech companies that attended this job fair. They mentioned that Gabby, whose video I stitched, said that she waited in line to talk to the recruiter only for a man to skip ahead and cut her off in conversation. This is where they mentioned me and how I added some thoughts in TikTok and how it amassed over 1.5 million. Now it's over 1.7. Rally the troops. I love that they included this part where I mentioned that women were the first coders. Ada Lovelace. And despite that, we are underrepresented in the industry right now in technology. They linked my video in the article, which you can also watch on my profile. Business Insider did their own investigation into the public comments left by women and non-binary attendees, where they expressed their disappointment over the experience, describing a place overcapacitated by rude, disrespectful, and female-attacking men. Many said that they saw no men attending the panels hosted by women and non-binary people to educate themselves on the issues of underrepresentation, inclusivity, and other issues in tech. They just appeared at the job fair, making it difficult for the attendees to get in for the attendees who this conference was intended for. Many missed half the day of the conference since they felt either unsafe or uncomfortable in the presence of men harassing them, or because due to the sheer amount of people that were there, including the men, and they wanted a full refund. So instead of feeling inspired and energized, they left feeling drained and overwhelmed. Many said that they saw a disproportionate amount of men being offered interviews and even being let into after parties. Where are the safe spaces for women? Some even said that they were bothered, harassed, and even hit on. One even said that a man handed her his resume when she wasn't even working here. Another said that she saw worrying behavior, including a man taking a photo of a female recruiter's lower body. Chaos was the word of the day. Many men attending as non-allies overstepped boundaries. We witnessed inappropriate comments, breaches of personal space, and a sheer lack of decorum. Another woman said, due to men being unchecked for displaying aggressive behavior, such as ganging up to trample women completely, they feared for their safety and fled the conference, the scene, first thing in the morning. I am so proud that we are rallying together as a community and making the headline news to raise awareness for these issues in tech, such as underrepresentation, inclusivity, and diversity.
NPR reports that the Grace Hopper celebration bills itself the world's largest annual gathering of women and non-binary tech workers. Tickets for the 4-day event, which took place in Orlando, Florida, ranged in price from $649 to $1,298 and included a coveted chance to meet one-on-one with sponsors such as Apple, Amazon, Salesforce, and Google. With a record 40% male attendees having found their way into the event, and of course, bypassing the social and celebratory aspects and primarily attending the job expo, many women felt that the event's purpose had been undermined by the inclusion of what the media likes to call cis men pretending to be non-binary. Truthfully, how can one tell if a man is non-binary or not when it requires no registration, no proof, does not describe a group of people based on any physical or observable phenomenon, and is a purposefully vague label? The answer is, you can't.
Pisses me off. Why would a man be there? Why do you want to be there? Like, you're literally in my fucking space. Like, oh my god, I'm literally gonna freak out. Historically, this conference was made for women because of the lack of representation of women in technology, despite women being the first coders. And this year is the first year where there has been an insane amount of men who win, and they're not going to listen to the sessions and learn. They were there just purely for the career fair. Keep in mind that the entire conference is named after Grace Hopper, who was a woman computer scientist and mathematician who paved the way for women in technology. Here's what happened in the words of the women who went. These men are acting like zoo animals, sprinting to the booths and physically hurting some of the attendees. Here, a woman posted that 2 men tried to follow her to her hotel room and she had to turn around and confront them for them to leave. Many posted that the men were physically pushing the women around and even hit on them, which made women feel uncomfortable, and this is supposed to be a safe space for women. Numerous women have reported that the men even took photos of the recruiters or photos of the participants, and were even talking about how women looked in their own native language so that others couldn't understand. Many women were extremely frustrated with the turnout because of the fact that they paid easily $1,500 to cover the expenses, the flights, the tickets, and it was just frustrating to see that men were taking advantage of this tech pipeline. And even guys were taking up the interview slots, time with HR, basically just like pushing women aside and interrupting women and just dominating as they do with meetings. Again, the men who attended went to barely any of the sessions to listen to the women speak about issues like underrepresentation in tech, the importance of inclusivity. Instead, they went straight to the career fair. And what they fail to acknowledge as men, because a lot of these men petitioned for Grace Hopper to end, since they think it's a special career fair privilege for women that they don't think is fair, yeah, they still go, but they failed to acknowledge the facts such as 70% of women/non-binary get interrupted by men during a meeting. I think it's a lot higher, at least 90%. Only 29% of them are part of the tech industry, yet 45% of women and non-binary were the first choice to get laid off this year. And here's an example of a man petitioning to the White House to end diversity hire and end something like Grace Hopper.
A non-binary man and a cis man are only different in that one has learned how to use gender ideology to his advantage, while the other has not. I understand that it is difficult to exclude men entirely, but to offer a non-binary option effectively makes it impossible to control the gender ratio or to confront men on their intrusion. I find it interesting that the blame is still being placed at the feet of cis men. Cis men, cis women, especially those that are white, are considered to be the perfect scapegoats, as a misunderstanding of intersectionality has led many to calculate oppression as if it were some sort of Dungeons and Dragons character. Take away a point for being white, another for being a man, add one if you identify as something, anything else. The result is ignoring material reality and a resistance to criticizing those who score enough oppression points, even if the oppression they face is nothing more than not being catered to as the center of attention. I would hope that this experience has opened the eyes of many workers, but truthfully, those reporting on it and those who attended seem resistant to name the problem, and instead prefer to blame cis men not playing by the rules instead of the rules themselves. This, dear viewers, is where we part. I am technically in the STEM field. Psychology technically is a science, even though it's considered a soft science, which is debatable. But you'll notice that in college, a lot of fields are being taken over by women. Like, there's a lot more women going to college in general, a lot more women going to school for psychology, for nursing. But when it comes to stuff like tech, it seems like there's a division between what's considered a real science and like a girl science. Like, to the point that whenever women start to become the majority in a field, it becomes basically ceded to the women. So biology is becoming a more women-dominated field. Oh, it's a women's science. It's not real science. Real science is physics or coding. And I think that's really just illustrative of how this all works. I mean, coding was all fine and dandy until women wanted to get into it, and women were here at the beginning. So when men took over, it's a man's field. Now that women are trying to get back into it, it's they don't want women in the field. It's that simple. And whenever there's a chance for a guy to essentially get a foot ahead by doing something as simple as, I'm a non-binary, they're going to take it. We're in an awful economy right now. It's very difficult for anyone to get ahead, especially right out of college. So I don't even necessarily blame the men for doing it, because the producers of the event oversold tickets, allowed this option to exist, and I don't think you really could have expected anything else when you've given someone this loophole that they can use to their advantage. Yeah, it's an awful thing to do, but it's not really something that I wouldn't expect from, I don't think you should have been surprised by this outcome. What I am surprised by is that so many people are reporting on it as a negative thing. Like, yes, it's bad. There are too many men here at a women's event. But instead of criticizing the fact that the rules allowing non-binary, which is a vague label that doesn't really mean anything, allowed for this to happen, it's, oh no, the cis men just pretended to be non-binary. It's interesting in that they refuse to get to the crux of the issue, which is that the rules themselves that allow anyone to identify as anything they want has impacts on material reality and on programs like this. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, let me know in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!